Let's talk now about new markets. New markets are on the other end of the spectrum. A new market is a market that does not have very much competition, but a business in a new market often faces bigger challenges than just pure competition. To go along with that metaphor, this is what we would call a blue ocean. In new markets, you don't necessarily know who the target customer is. You have to figure that out. The customer might not be aware that they even face the problem that you think you're solving. You may have to educate your customer on the need that they face. It may take a lot longer for you to find the right market and gain the traction versus operating in an existing market. You have to start from scratch. Competition is not as intense. The market opportunity might be overlooked by others. If you're operating in a new market, competition is not your biggest concern. Often a startup has to go through the process of activating awareness in a potential set of customers. Customers may not even realize that they face this problem. Activating awareness in customers is a very difficult job, not to mention expensive and time-consuming. In this case, the startup has to build their own market. Back in the 70s and 80s, in a market that I got involved in, there were beepers and actually some kinds of mobile phones that used an old technology called IMTS. Few people had those phones for emergency use, and a few had them in cars. But the new market was to untether or cut the telephone line to the regular phone and make it usable by everyday people, businesses, families, for personal use. That was a market that had never been addressed before, and the market need was apparent to us, especially considering our predilections about how the market could grow in the future. Still, what surprised us was how long it took for that market to grow. Customers were not even aware that this was a problem. Then over time, when people's habits changed and people began to expect to have a telephone conversation while walking down the street, the market opened up. Just as we predicted, the market became huge. New markets are really slow to get into. They're difficult because they have some technical challenges, and they always have the issue of market momentum. There are very few markets where people just dive in quickly, where everyone says, "Oh, I'm glad this is here. I'm in." To sum up, if you're trying to enter a new market, you need to make sure that it's massive, the opportunity is clearly there, and the timing is there. It's going to take a lot of money and a lot of time before that market becomes dominant. Now let's talk about something called resegmented markets. There are two types of resegmented markets that you should be aware of: price segmented markets and niche segmented markets. Price segmented markets typically refer to low-end segmented markets where a more affordable version of another product is introduced into the marketplace. In doing so, the business is able to tap into a completely new customer base that found the first product too expensive. To make sure you understand this, these companies are not competing for the same market segment as the big players. This is essentially taking a market that already exists, for example, let's say the airline industry or the auto industry, and providing a product that's good enough so that you can tap into the different parts of that customer segment that have a different price point. For instance, low-cost airlines offer a very cheap flight compared to a larger, more established airline with fixed airline costs. When you look at low-end market segments, understand that technology doesn't usually drive the ability to be in that space. It's the price point that we're talking about now. If there's a technology or innovation, it may focus on improving efficiency of the product. By reducing costs in a company, those companies are able to offer their product at a reduced cost to the consumer. As an example, if you look at the big airlines like Air France and British Airways in Europe, or Air India, they've got certain cost structures and certain pricing strategies for flight tickets. To change that cost structure significantly, it would require completely dismantling the airline and putting it back together. On the other hand, if you start a new airline a deeply efficient airline, let's say Ryanair in Europe or Indigo in India, they have a completely different way of managing their business, putting together their costs, so they're able to extend their cost savings to customers in the form of cheaper flight tickets. A word of caution here. Be very careful of price arbitrage when you operate in a low price segmented market. When you're offering lower price services, is it a lower price or is it arbitrage? The purpose of arbitrage is to fix a disparity in pricing in a market. But by the very nature of arbitrage, it's to eliminate that arbitrage, or with the elimination of the price disparity. Once that price is fixed, you're in trouble. Remember, most of the time the big players will realize and begin to exercise the process of becoming more efficient. They'll eliminate that price discrepancy that arbitrage was meant to solve. Another form of resegmented market is what we call the niche market. These are markets within a larger market, where the customers are better served by a more specific offering that caters directly to them. Consider a startup in the US called M. Taylor. The company started out selling only men's dress shirts, but the shirts are specifically tailored for the customer, based on measurements gathered by uploading photographs in their app. They get the proportions perfected from the images. The customer can select whatever shirt style and color they want, and then they get a perfectly tailored shirt delivered right to their home. Technically, they're in the clothing industry, but they're very focused on the specific market segment, 25 to 35-year-old males, working professionals, who are tech savvy and likely live in urban areas. The challenge with a niche market is whether or not you've got a big enough market and a big enough set of margins so that your economics can be sustainable. If you're talking about something like clothing, it's a multi-billion-dollar business, so you'll see a lot of niche players. One of the problems with niche players is they'll often cite the market size as the entire market that their niche is in. But that's not really the market size of their particular product. Entrepreneurs will often cite a really big market with billions of dollars of value, but they're actually citing the entire industry. If you sell tires, you can't quote the size of the entire auto industry. That market will never be as big because you only sell tires at the end of the day. Investors will see this and they'll catch you on it. While it's critical to define your market and your customer, it's absolutely essential in a niche market. You'll also need to define the value of the niche and why big existing players can't learn from your knowledge, adopt the specific value that your product's offering, and take it away from you. As an example, in this clothing space, there were a couple of companies that sold shirts newly tailored to be worn outside the pants. This is different than M. Taylor in that they didn't have a unique technology, but rather just a unique design theme. They were specifically cut to look good without tucking them into your jeans. I tried the shirts and I liked them. But after my second order, my regular favorite clothing store, where I bought all the rest of my clothes, found out about the trend and began to offer the same shirts. Out of convenience, as I was there anyway, I just bought them there. Guess what happened to the niche shirt business? Many startups operating in a niche market get turned down by investors because their value proposition is not that clear. There are concerns on the customer's willingness to pay more for that niche, and the startup would have found it very difficult to sustain its differentiation. Oftentimes you'll find that a startup will begin with a niche market as their target market, and then they'll eventually expand that market opportunity as they generate traction to open additional segments. If my shirt vendor offered me other things so I could shop at one convenient place, I may have stayed with them and given up my old standby clothing store. Now let's talk about clone markets. Clone markets are of particular interest for entrepreneurs in emerging markets. A clone market is a market that's established in one country and has the potential to be a good market, a good product, a good company in another. In a clone market, the basic business model customer types, and barriers to entries are known. What needs to be tested is the market demand. To enter a clone market, it's important for the model to be adopted and adapted in the regional marketplace based on local circumstances, local contexts, cultural, economic, and other support elements. In clone markets, one of the biggest risks is that the original company may want to eventually enter the market where the clone startup is. Still, clone markets are a great opportunity for entrepreneurs. For businesses that have extremely high demand, ultimately, one company may not be able to fulfill all of the demand in that global market. This leaves a niche market opportunity for entrepreneurs when the original business has not yet scaled into that other market. India's Ola Cabs and China's Didi were able to tap into Uber's clone markets and build successful businesses on their own. But there's one very important element to understand. In order for a startup to succeed in a clone market, they must adapt the model based on that new market. In our module on how entrepreneurs develop great ideas, we discussed the concept of copying with a twist. This means that an entrepreneur must deconstruct the problem being solved in the original market, underlying that product, and then adapt their offering and value proposition according to the customers in that particular market. Think about the different market types I've discussed so far. Which of these feels closest to the type of market that you're building for your startup?